Hello and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive series, I'm going to explore the annular solar eclipse, which occurs on the 14th of October 2023 in the sign of Libra. Now, I have, of course, done a special on the eclipses of October, which you can check out as well. But today I'm solely focusing on this particular event. So I'm going to give you a lot more detail, if that's okay. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining us. Please do share any thoughts you have. I do try to interact with each comment. If you're a returning visitor, it's lovely to have your company once more. Your support is really appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I would be honoured if you did so now. I want to give you a real overview of what this all means, a bigger context. Of course, we can talk about the sign of Libra and the fact it's very much to do with balance, fairness. It's an air sign. It's about communication. It's ruled by Venus. So we need to look at some of the principles around that. For example, where is the ruler at the moment? And in fact, it's in the sign of Virgo, opposed by the strict Saturn in the sign of Pisces. So as much as we can say that this new moon solar eclipse gives us an opportunity to set our intentions around relationships, we just need to widen the lens to try to understand the intricacies of this, I feel. Also, did you know the last time that we had a Libra solar eclipse was in 2004? That's 18 years ago. And you may be thinking, 18 years, that's a cycle that rings a bell. And you'd be right. Because when the first of this particular series, which is Saros Series 7, first occurred, it was in the sign of Aries on the 20th of April, if you recall. And then on the 17th of July, the nodal axis reversed into North Aries, South Libra. That's right. So the nodal axis follows the eclipses. So first time in 18 years, we're really being encouraged to think very, very much about the principles and values of the sign of Libra. But that doesn't mean to say that we should diss the energy of Aries. It's all about making them work together for us. And that's the critical thing. Also, this is not a total solar eclipse, so we're not going to get that complete blackout. And in fact, some people in North America, Central America and South America will actually be able to see the moon moving across the face of the sun, the ring of fire. So it's going to be very dramatic and exciting. What does that mean for you? What does it mean for your zodiac sign? I'm going to share that with you. But also, what does it mean for us all collectively? So I'm going to share the solar chart. But also, this event is very near to a fixed star. What's the influence of that fixed star? And also, when will we get the next solar eclipse in the sign of Libra? Well, it's in fact next October on the 2nd. And also Uranus, the planet of surprises but of disruption, is forging an almost exact quincunx with this event. A bit broader is Neptune. A few degrees more, both feeding to the sun, so we have a yod. What does that mean? We also have in the event chart the ascendant in Taurus, which of course, like Libra, is ruled by Venus. So a lot to discuss, a lot of exciting information to share with you. So please stay with me while I dive deep within all of this. Now, if more serious astrology is really beginning to excite you, and you want to know what year 2024 will hold for you, if you give me 3 pieces of your personal birth data, of time, date and place, or date and place if you don't know your time, I can prepare for you your unique personal forecast, totally individual to you. I'll also give you the rest of this year free, but in my special package of 30% off, you'll get your life roadmap, your character analysis report. This will give you searing insights into who you are and the patterns that are played out in your life so far, and how you can work with them more adroitly going forwards. Please see the link below for more. So this annular solar eclipse is the second in the series between Aries and Libra. It occurs on the 14th of October at 21 degrees and 7 minutes and at 5:54 p.m. Universal Central Time. Now, if you are a cardinal sign or you have important planets, all planets are important, in cardinal signs at 21 degrees, you could potentially have a conjunction, an opposition, or a square to this event. So those signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra itself, and Capricorn. But it has to be pretty tight. Now, different astrologers have different views. Now, for example, if you do have your sun or ascendant around about 21 degrees in Libra, it's obviously going to be mighty important. Mine's at 23 degrees and 50 minutes. It's pretty close, but some astrologers would really be saying it should be right honed down. You know, we're not talking about many degrees. As you know, I usually use an orb of about 3 degrees. And just from the feedback that you share with me, that does seem to sort of get in touch with how events broadly affect most of us. But it really is your choice and how much you know your natal chart. But we can also look at it in terms of whole sign astrology. So for example, if your sun is at 12 degrees in Libra, we can still take a view of what that will mean for the next 6 months. But that can be true of all the 12 signs, so I will look at that, as I said. But what about that fixed star? Well, it's only 47 minutes away, and it's Mu Frit. And this really is interesting because this suggests that if we're very industrious, we can prosper through our work. Now, on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart based on PISCES, which gives us that Taurus ascendant at 16 degrees 02. But I want you to see that Mars just moved into Scorpio, the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, the South Node, and the midpoint between Venus and Mars are all in the 6th house. So, 6th house is physical health, it's practicalities, it's the brass tacks of life. It's making our lives run efficiently, but it's also about taking responsibility for our welfare, trying to be a little bit more virtuous. So not very sexy, but of course the sign of Libra is very much about balance. So if we're doing something that we know is a little bit out of balance, eating a little bit too much chocolate or other calorific goodies, or having that extra sneaky glass of white wine at night, this eclipse is really asking us to maybe trim back a little bit to get that balance. But of course the sign of Libra is very much about relationships. It's ruled by Venus, so Libran relating can be very charming, very diplomatic, can tune into people very skillfully. But also we must be aware of our need to get on with people and seek approval could see us, if we become too obsessed with that, lose our identity. And our identity is characterized by the sign of Aries, or the 1st house in your natal chart. So we've all got our Aries position in our nativity, and that is the ascendant. So a lot of opportunities to try to connect better and more skillfully and listen better, particularly with Mercury, the ruler of communication, in the sign of Libra, very close to the event, but in that 6th house. So details matter over the next 6 months. But what about that quincunx with Uranus? Uranus, of course, can be very disruptive. Uranus in Taurus is not its best location, it's in fall. We've seen over the last 4 years, and the first 6 months it went through Taurus in 2018 before retreating back into Aries. We have seen anything to do with land, agriculture, food distribution, financial services and systems, the cost of raw products have all been rocked by the more unpredictable energies of Uranus. And Uranus in the event chart, PISCES, is also in the 1st house. So that's about what I want as an individual. So that points towards rebelliousness, linking into the part of this event which is very much about conscientiousness and providing services, the 6th house. And being conscious of what other people need. So we may have to contend with our own inner resentment about some of our obligations. That's one of the things I would say. Quincunxes make it difficult to integrate all the energies. And so even if we try in our own particular situation to be very supportive and understanding of other people's situations, we may still encounter people who still want it all on their terms. I think that's entirely possible. What about the quincunx to Neptune? It is a bit broader, and in the event chart and the solar chart, Neptune in the 12th house, we must not ignore our psychological needs. Saturn particularly is reminding us of that since it moved into Pisces on the 7th of March. It's actually a very good link with Mars, ironically, which has just returned home, domiciled in Scorpio, but it's not in such a good link with the ruler of the sign of Libra and the ruler of the sign of the ascendant, which is Venus. You can see that it's an opposition. Saturn's just under 1 degree, so we've got a 4-degree opposition, which is pretty tight. So, and they're going across the 11th and 5th houses. So however much we try to use charm, we could encounter someone who's rather censorious. Saturn, the father figure in the 11th house, laying down the rules. So I think the overall balance of these influences for me suggests that the ascendant in Taurus is asking us to be mindful of how we use resources, our values, very, very important. And the part of fortune is actually on the ascendant, which could be pretty fortunate, but that disruption that comes from Uranus is very profound. So I feel there is a lot of entitlement in society these days, a lot, where people feel that they should get special treatment. There's not so much consideration of other people's predicaments. So you could argue that this eclipse series is asking us to get the nice balance, that sweet spot between the need to be authentic and individual, Aries, and of course that particular solar eclipse of the 20th of April was challenged by Pluto. Some people would say that Pluto challenges this event, but it's on a very wide square because Pluto's just under 28 degrees. We're talking about 8 degrees. So yes, it's still very much in touch with the nodal axis in a T-square, as it has been since the 17th of July, and it will be through to the end of October. But I don't see Pluto so much on this event personally. It is in the square with Mars, which is more challenging. And of course on the 9th of October, when the events in Israel unfolded, Mars and Pluto were exactly square. So very warlike stance, and unfortunately those very sad events unfolded. So this Libran energy is asking us to find that sweet spot between where we need to stay true to ourselves, Aries, where we need to have our physical energy, where we need to really be in touch with our ego. We shouldn't be ashamed of ego, we all have one, but at the same time we are all being asked to be more mindful of how we relate. I think in some ways, particularly through Facebook, if I'm really honest, I think Facebook's great for reaching out to people, but also I feel it's a very, very painful forum in some ways. It's very much to do with exclusion and the need to be liked. There's one person that we've encountered over the last couple of years. He's got something like 15,000 friends. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, there's only so many friends you can keep up with who are genuinely friends in your life because of the time limitations we all have. So if someone is that obsessed with approval, that's not a good thing, and they could therefore be losing their identity. So that may be something we all need to be mindful of. But those old-fashioned principles of, replying to messages in a prompt way, understanding that someone else may have a more difficult situation than our own, being sensitive enough to think in those ways would all be very good Libran values. But if we're so keen to make sure that we've got everyone's approval, we're losing our identity, and that's finding that sweet spot between Aries and Libran energy. And on this particular event, however much we may want to focus on relating more skillfully, being more understanding, trying to find harmony, cooperation, very Libran energies. Uranus is going to make it difficult at times, as are Mars and Pluto in their square. I just don't see Pluto so much on the eclipse itself. Now, in terms of the solar event chart, I'm showing that on the screen just to give you a flavour of you like to look at things in terms of how we all relate to it. For sure, there they are, all in the 7th house. Mars, ironically, moves into the 8th, where, of course, it feels very comfortable in Scorpio. And Pluto in house 10, Capricorn, that fits as well. So, and we can see that here too, Venus, the ruler of the sign of Libra, moves into the 6th house, obviously in Virgo. So I think fakery around relating is going to be tested by Saturn, but also our need to be individual is being tested by Uranus, especially when it comes to difference of opinion over our values or money. So that's how I see that overall wheel. Now, in terms of each of the 12 zodiac signs, I'm going to go through them from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, relationships definitely are going to come sharply into focus for you, but you've known this since the nodal axis shifted on the 17th of July. And of course, Saturn and Neptune being in your 12th house, it's almost as if some things have been coming naturally to a close. It could be that someone from your past has been in some way creating an echo in your thinking now, but you also must remember why you didn't get together or why you are no longer together with that person if you are thinking about a romantic relationship. But for sure, finding those levels of cooperation can be something that can be very helpful. And also, if you're someone who enjoys working with people, whether it's around hobbies or crafting or just collaborating generally, you know, it could be anything from setting up a car share scheme to enjoying a sporting activity with someone, like going with a friend to play badminton or squash, because that 7th house can be about where we compete. It can, of course, be combative, so you could argue that this eclipse is very much about setting your boundaries and being a bit firmer about what you will and won't accept. And that could be a very good thing, particularly if there has been some painful stuff that's played out with Neptune since 2012 in your 12th house. If there's been deceptions or disappointments or separations, and Saturn is really coming into that energy even more strongly and really asking you to take the experiences of the past very seriously, or if you're needing to separate from something that's not working for you now, it may be very difficult to accept that there is a need for a change. And Pluto, as it moves back into Aquarius on the 21st of January, is really going to give you a lot of encouragement to think future forwards, not be so caught up perhaps around your work, your status, and all those kind of things. So the 7th house energy, you're someone who likes to take the lead, you like to have a lot of expression of your individuality. That's really good. But if you're doing that but not feeling much of a connection with anyone else, something may be out of kilter. If you're someone who's very skilled at relationships but you feel that you don't always get your devotion back, a bit more about feisting up on those boundaries. Taurus with Uranus in such a powerful angle to this event, maybe it is the case that you do have to think very carefully around those situations where you may be quite sacrificing. And because of your own Venusian rulership and your preference for stability, do you or are you sticking with a situation that actually has run its course? And it could be, to be honest, around your work. It could even be around the structure of your situation, your life. You may be in a comfortable routine that has its sort of cozy elements that you perhaps know aren't necessarily the best for you, but just making that change may be something you're resisting because it does give you that sense of cosseting, cosseting. I like cosseting. I think you'll really appreciate the word cosseting. It's a very Venusian word, but with the earthiness of your sign. So, you know, those creature comforts, those nice routines that are very pleasing to you. But if you're, for example, stuck in a job which gives you very little pleasure or satisfaction, even if it pays well, I think Uranus is being very provocative. And with your ruler Venus challenged by Saturn, the other thing that could come up over the next 6 months is if you're in a situation where you always seem to be the one who thinks about the practical strands and takes responsibility for looking out for others, and they're totally unaware of that, that also could become very unacceptable to you. And you may find yourself being, even if diplomatically, a lot more pointed about saying how you feel and what you need from situations, and rightly so. So Gemini, your ruler Mercury is pretty close to this eclipse, and for you it's in House 5. House 5 is very much about social pleasures, it's about affection, it can be about children, definitely about your key talents and attributes. If there is something that you want to bring greater warmth to, because the 5th house is very sun orientated, has a flavour of Leo, the airiness which suits your element of air too, it's a matching triplicity of element. This gives you a wonderful platform to go for it over the next 6 months and interact a lot more with people, because I feel that Uranus has been quite a challenging influence for many Geminis in recent years, especially with the nervous system, sleep being disrupted and so forth and so on. And you may have at times been quite happy to withdraw a little bit, but I think you're going to see from the time of the 21st of January, which this eclipse will power over, you are really going to start to come out and engage even more. Of course, it does depend on your natal chart. If you're someone who has a lot of Gemini, not so much Cancer, you may already be a very socially nimble person. But if you're someone who does tend to like your own company, perhaps want something to develop more in terms of your social interaction and interest, or even your love life, of course Jupiter pitching up in your sign on the 23rd of May next year is really going to help you. But I feel that you really should embrace the opportunity that this particular event does bring. But with, for you, Uranus in House 12 angling to House 5, it may be that you have to work on your anxieties or your insecurities in order to embrace the full value of the warmth of this eclipse. So Cancer, what is it that you want to fundamentally change about your home life, your family life, your emotional situation, your sense of feeling at peace and tranquility in your environment? Are there ways in which you can re-engineer your immediate environment, perhaps decoratively, or perhaps finding ways to create interests at home, such as crafting, that give you a lot of pleasure? The 4th house is very, very varied. You know, it is the core of who you are. You know, you're instinctive. Sometimes you make decisions not because of the logic, but because things feel right. But I feel some big shifts are coming your way over the next 6 months. It's going to be exciting. But because of Uranus being in the 11th house, it may be that around friendships and group activities, some new people can dynamically enter your world, because obviously Uranus sees things happen quickly. But it could also see some old hopes that you had or old alliances fade away, because I think you're going to become much more in touch with those core principles of your very being, which is, you know, feeling at peace, feeling at ease, really listening to your instincts as best you can. So that may see some Cancerians uproots unexpectedly, move somewhere completely different, or perhaps spend time more in nature, particularly by water. So Leo, expect life to speed up. And if you're someone who really does have a very big passion for interaction with others, which is often the case, not always, some Leo people will have more Cancerian influences in their chart. And of course it depends what house your natal planets are in too. It's not just being a Leo. It is more complex than that. But for you, I feel that there is going to be a speeding up. I feel around your work, there could be an opportunity to retrain in some way, learn new skills. If you have information or experiences that you can share with others, that actually can be very worth checking out. But do expect to also be a little bit more restless. You may want to get more active. You know, if you find yourself wanting to step up your exercise routine, particularly short bursty stuff, if you're not one for pounding the streets, it, you know, bores you a little bit, but you can get in the gym and do some circuits or dance more. You know, dancing would be a wonderful way to embrace this third house energy. You can dance from the comfort of your home, put some good sounds on and really shake it all up. That would be terrific. But if you are someone who has wanted to get a new mode of transport, you could well do so over the next 6 months. But most of all, you're needing much greater stimulation. And I think you probably recognise this from the time of the nodal switch on the 17th of July. And also with Venus going through your sign for such a long period of time, it's reminding you that your individuality needs to be reflected outwards in some kind of way. And I think the third house is through talking, it's through communication. You know, it's an air sign, it's about relating. The third house can be to do with your community. You know, are you going to interact with others more actively there? I think there's every chance that you will. So Virgo, for you, this eclipse occurs in house 2. But that's very much about how we feel about ourselves. But it's also our values, and it can, of course, be about everyday money. Uranus, the influence which I think is particularly profound on this event for you, is in your 11th house. That's about your friendships, but it's also about your future plans. You could find yourself rethinking some things, I feel, particularly because the ruler of the sign of Libra and of the sign of the ascendant on the natal event chart is of course Venus, and that's in your sign, where of course it's in its full, but it is opposed by Saturn as well. Ouch. You could encounter some folks over the next 6 months who see things very differently to you. Maybe in a love relationship it becomes a little bit more picky around who spends what and who contributes what. But the second house can also be very much about sensuality, and the sign of Libra is about conversation essentially, but relating. So for example, if you go to a cookery class, your local adult classes, you could actually meet someone there that you find is great company to be with, but you can also learn about preparing some lovely recipes. So the second house is quite sensual, and in your romantic domain, probably what you're going to be yearning for is a sense that the future is exciting, varied and stimulating, but also there is that intimacy. And if that's missing and you don't really have shared values and the money thing is a bit awkward, I think that may be something you've got to look at over the next half year. Now Libra, of course, we all know that eclipses and new moons are very much about setting our intentions. So the interesting thing for you is this is almost like a mirror. So when the solar eclipse occurred in Aries, that was house 7. For everyone else, collectively, this event happens in house 7, but for you, it's house 1. So you're being challenged, really, as you have been for many years, by that square with Pluto. And of course, Mars has just been going through your sign. It's still in that square with Pluto, but it's now just moved into the sign of Scorpio. So there may have been a quarrel or some situation where you didn't feel very heard that's happened really quite recently, perhaps even at the start of this week. And it may have brought up a lot of frustration, very much in keeping with some of the energies that have played out over the years. So you're being asked really to stay faithful to the idea that there is decency out there. You can find people who will respect and appreciate you, but if you're not with them now, you need to make some radical changes. And Uranus in the 8th house We know the 8th house is where things make way. It's where things die off, but it's also where they're rejuvenated. So it's about having the confidence really to feel that if you don't stay with something because you just don't want to rock the boat, very Libran, very Venusian, you'd rather just keep the peace. If you're keeping the peace, but you're not really living your best life, that's a massive challenge, you know. And for all Libran people, and as you know, my ascendant Libra, yes, it's nice to have pleasant relationships, but if they're pleasant relationships that aren't very authentic, they're not really very genuine. I feel that it's having the courage really to integrate that Aries energy of risk and starting afresh and being a bit rawer and telling it as it is, and not necessarily just using the disguise of good manners that apparently creates a balm of pleasantries, but underneath that can be a festering mix of all sorts of agendas that we encounter when we interact with people. And we can't control them, but we can control ourselves. So if you're giving more than you're getting, you've got to really take it seriously. So take the power of this eclipse to really supercharge what makes you so very special. And the key message to you is stop worrying about what other people think. It really isn't important, because your key skills will always be in tune with others. But if it's become an obsession to try and get that approval, this is the time to really change that. Scorpio, with Mars just having moved into your own sign, I feel that that's been giving you some pep, but of course it's in a square still, disassociate, with Pluto, your modern ruler. So something's happened, I feel, over the last week or so that may have seen something come into the open that was a bit hidden away. Or is that still to manifest itself? We all know new moons, solar eclipses manifest fresh energies. So over the next 6 months, you have a penchant of keeping your cards close to your chest. But other people could surprise you by actually revealing things that they've not been happy with. But the way they may deliver the information may be quite sudden and direct, a bit like you, because of Uranus being in your 7th house. So someone could be quite outspoken, and it might be difficult to take. And also because Venus for you is in your sector of the future and friendship, but being challenged by Saturn in your 5th house of romance, I feel if there are any sort of secrets or simmering resentments swirling beneath the surface, they're probably going to come out in the next 6 months. And you know, maybe it's going to be you who's ventilating them, because remember, Libra is air, so it's about sharing, and it is about relationships. Is it that you're involved in some kind of secret tryst? Is that actually now becoming really quite difficult to deal with emotionally? Or, you know, is there issues to do with a lack of trust in an existing relationship, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with a family member? These kind of suspicious parts of your nature are really going to come under the astral microscope over the next 6 months. Sagittarius, this eclipse occurs in your sector of friendship. How good is that? Friendship, future plans, fraternity, connections, networks. You can be someone with a massive appetite for all of that. But has that appetite declined a little bit this year? It wouldn't be a surprise, because of Saturn pitching up in house 4. And also Neptune since 2012 has made it much more difficult to understand how life was for you. Your worldview may have shifted quite a lot since then. And that may have been accelerated since the spring of this year in the northern hemisphere, the autumn in the south. And of course also Pluto's been rattling its way through your 2nd house of everyday money and values since 2008. So that's been a lot to deal with as well. So maybe you've in some ways forgotten the kind of interactions you used to have. So if you are up for a little bit of a get-together with your friends, whether it's a reunion for people you used to work with or go to college with, or you want to get some things going in your local community where you can be supportive, perhaps do some voluntary work or some kind of leadership role, or you simply want to go out and have much more of a laugh, as long as it feels right, that's the Saturn influence, I feel this is a great green light. Also, you could find, because of Uranus being in the 6th house, if there are friendships that you find are disruptive to you, or someone's very changeable, you set up a plan, they keep changing at the last minute, that could be someone you actually want to break away from, if I'm honest, over the next half year. So Capricorn, this event occurs for you in the 10th house, very redolent, the core energies of your sign. 10th house is about success, goals, ambitions, being very focused on our longer term plan. It can be about the material plane, can be to do with our relationship with our elders, experienced bosses and line managers. It can be to do with property matters, traditionality. If there's something you really want to manifest in your life that you feel has been just out of reach for so long, a big push is coming in the next year and a half. How do you make this work with Uranus in such a tough angle with this event? Well, I think if you want to be completely authentically you, it may be a little bit more difficult if you're wanting to get acceptance in some kind of traditional framework. But I feel that obviously, because of being a Capricorn, you're used to understanding what the rules are, but also perhaps at times understanding how you can work around things. But the facade, which is very Libran, could be that you're totally getting where someone's coming from and what they expect from you in, say, a big organisation, and perhaps you can use your flair in a sort of very well proportioned ways that are accepted. The other thing you might think of with the quincunx is to embrace self-employment if you aren't doing that already, the more entrepreneurial side of your nature. If you feel that your skill set is just not being recognised, then that could be something that you find very exciting about this eclipse. But just remember, with your ruler in a punishing opposition with the planet of money and love, Venus, it is important that you keep that cooperation, and that's where Libran energy is very successful. So you may have to push, but push in a little bit of a shrewd and diplomatic way in order to fulfill your goals. So Aquarius, fantastic solar eclipse for you in the 9th house, which is all about expansion, spontaneity, variety, travel, higher education, philosophies. Really, really exciting. But it's also about freedom, very much in keeping with the core values of your sign. But what about your two rulers? Uranus is, obviously in a quincunx. So whatever you do want to break free from, you have to be aware, with Uranus in the 4th house, that could create some instability. So for example, we've just moved again for the second time in 2.25 years, which is not really ideal. Very Uranus in the 4th house in terms of the sun, but there's a reason to it, and there were lessons to be learned, and the journey was actually very enriching, not always easy, but enriching. So sometimes we do need to change things. It doesn't mean to say it's a panacea that change instantly equals where we need to get to. So the 9th house could be in some ways gaining more knowledge. So knowledge could be very important over the next 9 months, whether it is about your emotional situation, the family dynamic and politics, where you live, about understanding your own need for security and stability, 4th house, being challenged by the radical energies of Uranus, your co-ruler, which can make us Aquarius people very restless but changeable. And then there's Saturn, the traditional ruler, applying in an opposition to Venus, the ruler of the sign of Libra, across the 2nd and 8th house axis. So money. So whatever you want to change and bring extra air to, and variety and balance to, knowledge is going to be really important to it. But I think you have to be mindful of your resources, the 2nd and 8th house, mindful of your need for security. So in other words, it's all very well thinking, right, I'm going to sell my home, buy that mobile home, and make my way around the country. It's going to be absolutely wonderful. And one day out, the engine breaks down. You know, it's important if we do something daring and very, very bold like that, that we do just, you know, factor in the downside, because it would be daft not to do so. But a very exciting, lively time is in store over the next 6 months. So Pisces, that brings us to your good self. Well, this eclipse occurs in the 8th house. We all know the 8th house is very psychological. It's very much about ends and beginnings. It can be about deep transitions, very much ruled in a way by the energy of Mars and Pluto, which just happen to be in a bit of a battle at the current time. What can we make of all this for you? Well, let's first of all take a look at the 2 planets that are domiciled in your sign at the moment, Saturn and of course your co-regent of Neptune. So Neptune's in a quincunx for this event, and Saturn's in an opposition with the planet that rules the sign of Libra. So I feel that what the 8th house energy is saying is that if you've been very invested in something and you're not really getting back something that feels enriching, so if you've been very devoted, for example, whether it's to an interest, a hobby group, a circle of friends, a business you work for, but you don't really feel fully valued, or you don't feel there's an evolution for you, you just feel that you're expected to fulfill that particular role, and that's it. There's nothing moving on. That could be very frustrating, but that can happen in relationships. You know, we can meet someone, we can have great connection, it can be very sexual, it can be exciting, it can be fun, but then it doesn't really move forwards. And the 8th house then demands that we rinse out of a situation what's not working. So in other words, we cut the cord. And that's one of the toughest transitions in life, literally life and death. So the 8th house, I feel, in a spiritual and emotional way for you, is kind of saying, in its opposition to the solar eclipse of Aries, which occurred on the 20th of April, are you identifying with something? Are you holding on to something in order to preserve something that gives you some kind of security, and resisting some very deep changes within yourself or your practical circumstances? The 8th house can be about property, investment, savings, pensions, all that kind of entrepreneurial shit. If you're not budging on something because you prefer just to stick with what you know, Uranus is there rattling away, giving you loads of ideas, but you have to carry them out, otherwise you could feel stuck. And then with Saturn being in opposition with Venus, you're not necessarily going to get particularly supportive messages from other people. So the 8th house for you, I feel, is going to be passionate, it's going to be powerful. I feel you're either going to be looking for that kind of deepest of all connections in relationships. So if you're in one, it's got to be 100% or almost not bother. You certainly need a lot of mental stimulation in all sorts of relationships. And in a relationship you are in, of any kind of all, whether it's a business relationship, a partnership, or in a sexual alliance, there has to be a sense of movement. And if there isn't that sense of movement, I feel that that could start to feel quite cramping. So some kind of big evolutions in the works, and it may be one that you're reluctant to go with, but I feel if you don't go with it, you could actually make it more difficult for yourself. It's almost like trying to hold on to the handrail of you know, those moving steps that go down at railway stations or the underground or airports. However much you hold on to the handrail, you're going to get clattered down those stairs. So that could be a little bit how this feels, but it also could open you up, if you go with it, to the most magical of new beginnings and exciting developments. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry this video is later than I would like. It has been because we've moved and there's been so much to sort out. Please like, comment, share or subscribe.